Shabbat Shalom. Earlier in the week, I recorded a conversation with Adam Sachs, who was at the Capitol on January 6th, and we will be honored by sharing together in that conversation. I hope you find it meaningful as I did. Hi, Adam Sachs is here with us this evening. He was at the Capitol on January 16th, and he can give us a perspective on what happened there. We're not going to get into anything that has to do with security at the Capitol, which wouldn't be appropriate for us to do so. But Adam, thank you for being with us. Adam is a member of our board, been a member of our congregation for a while. His son Finney is one of our became a bar mitzvah here and a confirmand here. So Adam, thank you for being here. Let me ask you something. How did you end up at the Capitol that day?
So it was January 6th, and my son had an internship opportunity with one of the leadership offices in Washington in the Capitol building. So that was rather unusual. So he had this internship. My business takes me to Washington regularly, and so I used it as an opportunity to get him kind of acclimated. And then I was going off doing my business in my office down the street from the Capitol.
So you spend a significant amount of time in the Capitol on a regular basis?
I do. I formerly was counsel to a committee and close to several members of Congress. And part of my job, I work with my colleagues in our Washington, D.C. office. So I'm in Washington quite a bit. I'm familiar with the Capitol and have worked in there in the past. So I was familiar and I wanted to help my son kind of get acclimated. I did not intend on being there, by the way, when this all happened.
But it was Phineas. What, he was just starting the job, right?
Yeah, it was his first day on the job.
Oh boy. Okay, but knowing Finney, he can handle anything. I mean, if I want someone taking care of me, I'll have Finney there.
Well, I frankly learned a lot about my son. He is mortified like my father. He has the humility of my father and doesn't like me talking about him. But one would think, he'd be a good guy to have on your side. He demonstrated that on January 6th. So I was back at my office and I received a text message from a friend of mine in that office inviting me to come over. It was an unusual day, as you know. They were certifying the election results and of the presidential election, and he invited me to come over, advised folks to allow me in because it wasn't a day that typically folks would be in the Capitol. And so I came over kind of unexpectedly came over on his first day.
Yeah. So let me ask you something. Was there a sense, since you in the Capitol a lot, and was there a sense that something was going to happen? I mean, what was the perception? Did they think something was going to happen? I knew everyone knew the president was having a rally, but yeah. Did people sense it was going to move in a bad direction?
No, there was heightened security, but there was no sense. I mean, my sense, frankly, was there could be no more safe place to be than inside the United States Capitol on a day like this, where the Speaker of the House, the entire leadership of the Congress, as well as the Vice President, was in the House, literally. Yeah. And so we didn't expect it. That we knew that it was going to be an unusual day because there were going to be folks in Washington protesting the election results and ginned up by the president. And so there was a sense that it was going to be a momentous day, but not certainly for the reasons as it played out.
So just because of the political tension, whether it would be certified, there would be protests by the senators. Okay, so it was a general sense. There was going to be tumult inside among the representatives, but not outside. Let me ask you this. When did they know that it was getting out of hand?
Well, so I had arrived at the Capitol building around 12:30, and there were chants, and sort of it was very under control on the I guess that was the east side of the Capitol when I walked in, but it did not. Again, it appeared I didn't believe there was going to be tumult in the inside the Capitol either. I mean, I think this was a foregone conclusion that the election results were to be certified. And it was really not until, well, we looked out the windows and saw a massive crowd out there, but it wasn't until I went down with my friend to grab a bite to eat, and we were down in the crypt area, is what they call it. I didn't realize that until watching the coverage on this, but the crypt, which is right underneath the Capitol, the main lobby of the Capitol, there were folks running, plainclothes folks running, and police chasing them. That was the clue I took that this was something was awry. So we quickly hurried back up to our offices, and then there was about 10 minutes later there was a shelter in place warning that came out, and I remember almost every detail. I am going to stick to not really discussing where I was,
Sure, absolutely.
or which office, but at some point, I don't recall if it was someone's phone or how we were notified that we needed to shelter in place, but it was a problem at that point.
So when people heard shelter in place, did they realize why there was shelter in place? In other words, did they realize that the that house had been penetrated by I call them seditionists. So I mean, people who wanted to do, well, we can call them anything you want, but
I think it's a fair characterization.
I mean, I call them seditionists. They wanted to stop the government, so I'm going to call them that.
Right.
So did you realize it was that the seditionists were that was what it was about, or
we did. So in these congressional offices there are TV screens all over the place, and we're seeing some images that were alarming, and we were in a place that was typically secured by law enforcement, and there was no law enforcement around, which suggested to me that they were otherwise occupied, and that was a problem. So it was serious at that point. And we turned off the lights in the office. It was a suite of offices, and we hunkered down. And this is really where my son demonstrated some leadership qualities. So he helped lead the effort to barricade the doors, and we were those staff members and others that were kind of behind the doors, protecting ourselves at that point.
what was the place where you were specifically located? Did the seditionists try to enter that area?
They did, and I don't now at this point. I do lose track of the timeline, and frankly, my son and I, over the several days after this happened, did not really watch the television coverage. But so I can't exactly tell you what time. Within probably an hour, probably 45 minutes of when we were told to shelter in place, we were confronted by this, as you call them, the seditionists, and they were trying to crash down the door, and we successfully kept that from happening.
So what was it? Were they continually trying to get in, or they tried, it didn't work, and they went on to someplace else? I mean, I don't get it. It's hard to get a sense when you see the news reports.
Yeah, there was a Reuters and a Washington Post photographer that was trapped in our office with us, and so there are photographs that appeared in the Washington Post and the New York Times, which give a sense for what it was like. This was prior to us having to actually physically push back the intruders, but they pushed for, it seemed like a long time. It was probably a minute, and they couldn't get in. They yelled expletives at us, and then they did move on. Thank God.
I know you, I know you, look, I know this is all under investigation. Um, and the specifics you can share, but do you get a sense that they knew where they were going?
Um, I I did not, to be honest. I believe that the group that came to our area were essentially marauding the entire capital and looking for people to terrorize, and they came upon us. But you know from the television coverage, you see that people had they had weapons, they had baseball bats, they had zip ties, I guess they're called, and perhaps they knew where I would imagine that there were a healthy dose of these folks knew where offices were in the Capitol, so perhaps they were the group that tried to break down our doors was part of that group. I don't think they were. I think the fact that they failed at getting in and then moved on suggested they didn't have any clear purpose to get to us.
Was it what would there have been? I mean, there's all, everyone is, Monday morning quarterbacking this. There wasn't enough security, blah, blah, blah. All the things that were said. Was there any way for them to anticipate something like this? What's your sense? I mean, there's always trying to blame people. The Capitol Police weren't ready, and all of this stuff.
Yeah, you can't blame the individual officers in the least bit. They did, and we've seen. I have watched some of the impeachment proceedings this past week, and you can't blame the individual officers. You can blame the police force and probably the sergeant of arms in the Capitol. They were not properly prepared for this sort of activity, and and then we haven't the second part of what Finney and I experienced was that after this initial effort to break in, we were stuck like sitting ducks for an extended period of time. And this is where it becomes difficult for me to, frankly, be that sort of level-headed and tolerant and open-minded about the conduct of the president. We were waiting for the president to authorize reinforcements, which never came. And as I understand it, that was authorized by others, including the mayor of Washington, D.C. and the vice president. So they should have had reinforcements that day, given the level of tumult that was that could have happened and did happen, and they did not plan properly, in my opinion.
Normally when you go into the Capitol, you must have some credentials to get in. Do you sense there's good security there? I mean, forget about when there's a riot. But I mean, do you sense there is security there?
Yeah, generally it's heavy security, and it's terrific. And there was that day, if you were just happening in and wanting to get into the Capitol, it would have been very difficult. But when we're talking about a large throng that physically wanted to will themselves into the building, that's another story, and they were not prepared. Generally speaking, it's a highly secure area, which is why I was texting back to my family, showing videos of protesters outside, not thinking that they presented a threat to us.
Hmm. After the building was under control, were you? Did you ever, when you were able to get out of your the offices where you're barricaded, were you able to did you have any direct contact with some of these seditionists? Were they still wandering around, or have they all been removed, or?
So once additional reinforcements had been authorized, and this is the second phase that was equally as terrifying as the first one that I described. Um, we were confronted once again, and by a large group. Turns out it was FBI SWAT team, I believe, in definitely in military fatigues, as well as Capitol Police, and they could not provide us appropriate credentials. Apparently, the badges were too big to fit under the door, so they ended up breaking through at another spot and then coming in with, I think, AK-47s directed at us.
So
Uh,
they were trying to get in, and you couldn't trust whether they were who they said they were.
yeah, we were at heightened alert,
God.
and didn't, and they sounded like amateurs, frankly, because I think they were scared as well. And I learned a little bit about, law enforcement and what the challenges they face in situations like this. They sounded like amateurs, and they couldn't demonstrate who they were. And I guess, I speculate that they figured we were either Trump people who had taken over an office, seditionists who had taken over an office, or we were held captive by those folks. And so it was scary. And ultimately, that group, to answer your question, once they made sure the area was secure and that we were safe and we were not threats, we were led to safety, but we were led through the Capitol, the main hallway, and past a group of what I would characterize as sneering, handcuffed seditioners, and it was,
Must-
like out of a movie scene, as we were led to safety.
hmm. We almost out of time, but I just want to ask you something. It's more of an opinion. What's your sense as someone who lived through it? I mean, we know about the impeachment and um, the trial and all those things relating to it. But what do you think is the long-term meaning of this? That the Capitol was attacked, and um, people came in and wanted to threaten the officers of the representatives and senators of our country. What's your sense of someone who's went through this, the long-term impact of this?
Well, um, if it's been about 5 or 6 weeks, it feels like yesterday. And part of the reason I am willing to speak a little bit publicly about is that it is seared into my head, and I believe it should be seared into the American consciousness forever. It was, there were a lot of mistakes made, but there also is a lot of lessons which you can help us understand more than I about the power of the big lie. And I kept believing that this president was going to give up the ghost at some point, and that sanity would have to prevail, and he couldn't keep continuing to sort of foment hate throughout his presidency. And again, throughout this period between when he was not reelected and the inauguration, that did not play out. I should have listened to my wife, who told me he would never change. These are my opinions. Um, but I took some comfort, and I think one of the takeaways in my son, and I want to emphasize, my son is a strong leader, and he has a strong moral compass and a sense for social justice because of my family's history, my father having been involved in the civil rights movement, um, but also because of the experience that he had with you, Rabbi Londi, and with Tom Barnett as a member of this congregation class at New Reform Temple. And I want him. I think he's doing all right. He went back in the saddle and continued out his internship after we spent a few days getting him home and allowing him to hug his mother and his sisters. But he got back in the saddle and continued on the path towards doing good by our country and for our country. Most importantly, in my opinion, is that the Congress went back to work just hours after all of this happened. We were in a holding area for this whole thing took about 9 hours for us until we were released and onto the streets, literally, of the Capitol. And as we were being let go, the Congress was back in session and they did their business. And there were a lot of patriots on both sides of the aisle who did what was clearly right, in my opinion, and certified the results of the election. There were also a lot of good people, including Republicans, who voted to certify the results of the election, who also expressed personal concern for the health and safety of my son and me.
Mm.
The concern I have is that over time, this whole thing becomes just another political event. And I
Yeah.
think that the votes that happened this week in Washington demonstrate that.
Mhm.
There are some members of Congress who want to have it both ways, and came up with not a good legal argument, in my opinion, again, to say that you can't impeach an individual who's not in office. That's just flat out wrong, and there's historical precedent and legal
Sure.
precedent for it. But the longer we get away from that day, the concern I have is the more it becomes lumped into, just another political crisis. And this was something very, very different.
Yeah.
And that's why I'm talking a little bit about this. I don't believe this ought to ever leave the consciousness of our nation. And it was not right. And I've never feared for my life. I'm quite sure my son has never feared for his life.
Mhm.
He did, and it was as a direct result of um, callous indifference on the part of our political leadership, and that can never be forgotten.
Yeah. Well, we're happy you're safe.
Thanks.
And we're really thankful. Cindy, one of the best products of the New Reformed Temple. We'll get him. We'll have him a chance to share things with the congregation. So Shabbat Shalom and thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Adam, for sharing those moments with us. I know the congregation got a lot out of your conversation, and hopefully we won't confront something of that nature ever again. So let us continue in our service, page 368, with the adoration. Thank you, Adam, for sharing those moments with us. I know the congregation got a lot out of your conversation, and hopefully we won't confront something of that nature ever again. So let us continue in our service.